Cartels are now officially in the Pentagon's crosshairs. And it's not just the wall anymore. Trump ordered the kill shot.
A thunderous roar rolled across the trees as a US F-15 Strike Eagle cut through the darkness. No one on the ground knew it was coming. Within minutes, an entire cartel empire would vanish. This was not a warning shot or a raid.
But Latin America's got a lot of cartels. They've got a lot of drugs flowing, so, we want to protect our country.
It was a secret order brutally carried out by American troops. What happened next is absolutely terrifying. Into the night, the Eagles approach. The operation began under the cover of absolute darkness. It was midnight, and the skies above Mexico seemed calm and empty. But slicing through that silence were 12 U.S. Air Force F-15 Eagles, flying in a tight formation at 30,000 feet. To the human eye, they were invisible. No lights flashed, and no sound reached the ground in time. They were phantoms in the night, carrying a mission that would soon shake a criminal empire. Inside the cockpits, pilots sat locked into silence. Every man knew that one wrong word or sound could compromise the mission. The jets carried advanced electronic warfare pods that could completely shut down communications and sensors across a wide area. When the formation entered position, the pods released powerful radio interference that blanketed every frequency used by the cartel. Their handheld radios and cell networks went dead instantly. Satellite phones and long-range antennas filled with static. At the same time, the pods sent out false radar and GPS signals, tricking any detection equipment or surveillance drones into showing fake positions or nothing at all. On the ground, GPS receivers gave wrong coordinates, security cameras froze, and night vision scopes displayed distorted green haze instead of movement. Every tool the cartel relied on for warning or defense stopped working. High above, the American aircraft operated inside a secure military network unaffected by the jamming. Their encrypted systems continued feeding live coordinates to the pilots and to command units tracking the mission in real time. Below, the cartel compound was alive with activity. Men carried crates, while others guarded the perimeter with rifles proudly slung casually across their shoulders. To them, it was just another routine night. Shipments of narcotics were being packed, trucks were loaded, and generators hummed beneath the thick, humid air. When radios began to crackle with static and a few security monitors froze, no one paid much attention. They blamed the heat, the power grid, or cheap equipment. The guards laughed, smoked, and boasted about the money their bosses were making, unaware that the silence creeping through their systems was not a glitch. They had no idea that American targeting computers had already locked onto their world. Each pilot kept his eyes fixed on glowing screens. The target data was clear. There was a massive, fortress-like drug lab hidden deep in the jungle. Concrete walls reinforced the compound, and guards patrolled as if it was impenetrable. But in the eyes of the F-15s, it was nothing more than coordinates waiting to be wiped off the map. The air crews had trained for weeks for this single strike. They knew where to hit, how to hit, and what would happen if they missed. Then the code came across the headsets. It was short, sharp, and final. Execute, execute, execute. Those three words ended the silence in the cockpits and set everything into motion. Pilots steadied their grips. The command meant one thing. It was time to deliver America's answer to the cartel's reign. Bomb bay doors creaked open. Inside each jet, the weapons system moved from safe to armed, and the cockpit relays made a sharp clicking confirmation the pilots all heard. The bombs were set to the exact GPS coordinates uploaded to the aircraft and would activate their fuses after release. There would be no stray impacts, no warning shots, only direct hits. In seconds, fire would rain down, and an empire would be reduced to rubble. But to understand why the Eagles were unleashed, you must first see the nightmare this cartel built. The Cartel of Shadows. For years, this syndicate was more than a drug cartel. It was a shadow empire that ruled the borderlands with blood, bullets, and fear. Towns that should have been alive with families and businesses became ghost villages, emptied by forced disappearances. This was not random violence. It was methodical, designed to send a message. Anyone who spoke against them or refused to pay their extortion fees or worked with rival gangs simply vanished. Their bodies rarely returned. And when they did, they were mutilated and displayed in public plazas.
2 bodies were discovered hanging from an overpass. Thousands of people entering the city can easily see.
Carved messages were left in the flesh, with warnings for the living to obey or share the same fate. The cartel's cruelty extended beyond drugs. They built human trafficking networks that funneled thousands across borders.
Within one of Mexico's largest cartels, whose specialty are so-called long-haul migrants.
Children were taken from villages, women were sold into brothels, and men were forced into brutal labor camps. The same chemical labs that produced fentanyl also served as waypoints for these operations. The drug empire had become a marketplace of human misery. To enforce their power, the cartel maintained its own army of killers. These men did not act like criminals, but like soldiers. They wore body armor, carried military-grade weapons, and trained with precision. They recorded their executions, edited them with chilling discipline, and spread the videos as propaganda. These films showed not just brutality, but organization. This was an army run like a state, daring governments to stop them. Their product was fentanyl, but their real weapon was fear. This drug lab hidden in the jungle was not simply a factory, but the financial engine that fueled their entire war machine. Every pill produced here meant more guns, more mercenaries, and more corruption. Mexican officials who tried to resist were assassinated. Police units sent to raid cartel sites were ambushed and slaughtered. Judges refused to hear cartel cases, knowing their families would be killed within days. The group created a parallel government, one built not on law, but on terror. American officials watched this expansion with growing alarm. This was no ordinary criminal group. This was a narco-terrorist army willing to act like a nation within a nation, and their threats extended beyond Mexico.
They're too dangerous, put in jails, standing trial in this country, because we don't want them to come back ever.
Fentanyl shipments were killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. The cartel knew this, and they didn't care. In fact, their leaders bragged in intercepted calls that no American administration could stop them. But the Jungle Lab changed the game. Intelligence showed it was the center of their power and the hub that kept their empire alive. Destroying it would not just be an economic blow. It would be a direct message that their reign of terror had crossed a line. In recent months, violence across Mexico began to escalate, giving U.S. intelligence. A trail of blood, the atrocities that raised alarms. The decision to unleash American warplanes did not come from one single event. It came from a chain of horrors.
A horrifying cartel massacre has rocked Mexico once again.
It began in Chihuahua. Commuters crossing a bridge one morning froze in shock. 19 bodies hung from the structure, swaying in the breeze like trophies. Each victim had been tortured.
Several decapitated were found hanging from a bridge or stuffed inside a van.
Their skin marked with knives, their faces mutilated. Above them, a banner fluttered. It carried a message of dominance, claiming that this region now belonged to one cartel. For the people, it was a declaration of war. Weeks later, the violence escalated in Juarez.
Our crew in Juarez says suspects continue to set vehicles on fire in different parts of the city.
At midnight, the streets thundered as car bombs detonated outside police stations. Entire blocks shook, and dozens of officers were killed in blasts, designed with military precision. Analysts noticed that these attacks used tactics seen in Iraq and Afghanistan, just the kind insurgents used against American troops. Whoever was behind it had the training and resources of an organized army, not just a criminal gang. Then came Michoacan. A bus carrying more than 40 migrants vanished on a rural highway. Families waited, desperate for word, and none came. No bodies, no ransom calls, no evidence. They had simply disappeared. Investigators whispered that human trafficking networks were absorbing these victims, but no one dared to say more. Mexican officials quietly admitted off the record that the violence carried the same signature of a single cartel was expanding its grip.
Last night, a Honda was set on fire in a colonia just a few blocks away from the Zaragoza port of entry.
As these events piled up, intelligence agencies in Washington and Mexico City began to compare notes. Patterns emerged. The timing of drug shipments lined up with spikes in killings. Surveillance showed convoys of vehicles moving between known trafficking hubs at the same intervals that fentanyl shipments flooded into the United States. For the U.S., this was the breaking point. It had become clear that this was not a decentralized trade. It was being fed by one industrial hub, a core facility powerful enough to bankroll massacres, bribe officials, and terrorize entire states. Still, there was a problem. Where was this hub? For months, analysts argued. Some swore it was in Juarez. Others pointed to Michoacan. But then, a breakthrough came from above. Satellites sweeping the unexplored jungles of central Mexico caught something strange. Heat blooms appeared at night in isolated forest regions, too strong to be from villages, yet too controlled to be wildfires. It was here that American intelligence began to peel back the jungle's mask, unmasking the jungle fortress. For 3 years, the compound hid under dense jungle and looked like empty forest from the ground. Finding it required many different tools and many people working together. First, signal monitoring showed something odd. Patrol planes and listen stations recorded repeated bursts of radio and cell traffic coming from one area at the same hours each night. Analysts compared those times to truck movements in nearby towns and found a match. That pattern meant the traffic was not random. Whoever operated there had a schedule. The signal data did not show buildings, but it pointed to a single active site. Next, satellites provided images that supported the signals. Nighttime thermal images showed steady heat in the same spot the signals came from. Infrared photos and radar imagery showed straight lines and shapes under the canopy. Those images suggested roofs, roads, and machinery. One thermal image could be a false positive. Several images taken over weeks reduced doubt. The satellite data turned a signal pattern into a mapped location. Drones also gave ground-level detail. Unmanned aircraft flew low over clearings. They recorded sounds and took close photos without entering restricted airspace. Drone footage captured generator heat and lights coming from vents. Photos showed access roads and concrete structures. The drones showed that the site had infrastructure consistent with a large processing complex, not a small camp. Then, human reporting confirmed what machines suggested. Villagers reported large trucks arriving late at night. A detained courier described fences, guard towers, and armed guards. Local informants supplied convoy routes and code words. Those human reports matched the satellite and drone images. Human sources gave context that sensors could not provide. They explained how supplies moved and how the site operated. Field teams also worked quietly. Operatives posed as timber scouts and researchers to get close without being seen. They planted small sensors and returned reports. The sensors recorded heavy machinery sounds and chemical smells. Those reports convinced engineers that this was not a backyard operation. All of these inputs were sent to a fusion cell. The fusion cell combined satellite maps, drone photos, sensor logs, intercepted messages, human reports, and financial records. Analysts layered the data on the same map. They marked power sources, storage tanks, production lines, guard posts, and access roads. They ran simulations for different strike options and measured likely blast zones and civilian risk. The combined model left little doubt. The site was not a small lab. It was a fortified production complex capable of large-scale output and armed defense. The model made clear where a strike would do the most damage to production and least harm to civilians. It required patience, cross-checking, and refusal to accept single explanations. The teams argued, pushed for more proof, and tested every lead. When planners saw the final picture, the conclusion was stark and simple. This was a fortified industrial complex, capable of sustaining mass production and violent control. It was the engine behind the recent bloodshed. At last, the U.S. had found the monster hiding in the trees. But finding it was one thing. Trying to destroy it would spark a political firestorm. The diplomatic powder keg. For decades, the United States and Mexico have maintained a delicate balance of cooperation and mistrust in their shared fight against powerful cartels. Every extradition, every joint raid, and every seized shipment has come only after intense negotiation. Analysts often warn that any direct U.S. military strike inside Mexico would risk shattering that fragile equilibrium, a scenario both governments have long tried to avoid. Inside Washington, officials and advisors debated possible paths forward. Some cautioned that a unilateral strike could inflame anti-American sentiment, destabilize Mexico's leadership, and damage crucial trade ties. Others pointed to grim statistics. More than 70,000 American deaths each year linked to fentanyl overdoses, with law enforcement tracing bulk production to a handful of industrial-scale operations across the border. To do nothing, one senior official said privately, is to let the deaths continue. In late 2025, the administration took a bold and controversial step. It moved to classify certain Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, a policy shift that observers described as legally transformative, but diplomatically explosive. While this designation does not automatically authorize military action, it expands the U.S. toolkit beyond traditional law enforcement, theoretically allowing broader interagency involvement, including the Pentagon in counter-cartel operations. According to several reports, officials in Washington even floated the idea of economic pressure. The proposal allegedly included potential tariffs on Mexican exports, a move that, if enacted, could send shockwaves through both economies. For a government already facing inflation and public unrest, such an ultimatum would amount to unprecedented pressure. Mexico's president responded with fiery public remarks, defending her nation's independence. In a televised address, she declared, "The Mexican people will under no circumstances accept interventions, intrusions, or any other action from abroad that are detrimental to the integrity, independence, or sovereignty of the nation, including violations of Mexican territory by land, sea, or air." Yet behind the public defiance, a few senior officials inside Mexico's intelligence service quietly stayed in contact with American agents. They sent small pieces of information about cartel routes, weapons movements, and chemical suppliers through private channels that bypassed official oversight. These quiet exchanges were meant to keep a fragile bridge between the two governments. The Mexican officials feared that if communication broke down completely, the United States might act on its own. That could mean drone surveillance missions inside Mexican territory.
According to U.S. officials, the U.S. has stepped up secret drone flights over Mexico to hunt for fentanyl labs.
Cyber attacks on cartel logistics, or even limited precision strikes on production sites near the border. By keeping contact open, they hope to reduce the risk of sudden military action, civilian casualties, or a public diplomatic crisis. For Washington, maintaining those back channels also provided a way to gauge Mexico's real position behind the speeches and to avoid turning a tense standoff into a full-scale confrontation. In an apparent show of cooperation, Mexico accelerated the extradition of high-profile cartel leaders, 29 in total, in what newspapers called an unprecedented mass transfer. The move was widely interpreted as a goodwill gesture meant to diffuse tension, Yet even as those bosses landed on U.S. soil, the jungle fortress kept running day and night, pumping out poison and financing the atrocities tearing through the borderlands.
If President Trump builds a wall along the border with Mexico, will it be much harder for this stuff to get into the United States?
The White House saw through the gesture. Extraditions were temporary victories that changed nothing on the ground. The lab was the heart of the operation, the engine that fed the entire network. As long as it kept running, new warlords would rise to replace the old, and the deaths would continue to climb. Inside the West Wing, meetings grew shorter and voices sharper. Intelligence reports arrived by the hour, each one confirming the same thing. The lab was still active. Production had even increased. Every delay meant more shipments, more overdoses, and more funerals. The pressure inside the Situation Room built like a ticking clock. America's patience finally broke.
Latin America's got a lot of cartels. They've got a lot of drugs flowing, so we want to protect our country.
After months of tense diplomacy and growing public outrage, senior officials gathered in the West Wing and signed the order. The decision was final. The United States was no longer waiting for cooperation. It was time to unleash its full force on Mexico's most ruthless cartels. Wiped off the map. The operation began with the release. The first payload was a pair of 5,000-pound bunker-busting bombs guided by precision satellites. They tore downward faster than sound, punching through the canopy and vanishing into the soil before detonating. The ground convulsed like an earthquake. Buried bunkers folded in on themselves, command tunnels imploded, and fortified chambers collapsed, trapping hundreds inside before they even understood what had struck. The secondary wave followed. Strikes rained down in timed intervals, targeting every key node on the map. Barracks, watchtowers, fuel depots, and the heavily reinforced command center. Within seconds, the base's carefully built defenses were shredded to rubble. Entire platoons of cartel guards were vaporized before they could fire a shot.
If their cartels are killing people in the United States and the MS-13 and Tren de Aragua gangs are...
Then came the firestorm. A bomb hit the heart of the operation, the rows of chemical vats that fed the drug empire. The explosion turned the jungle night into blinding daylight. Fireballs rose hundreds of feet high. One tank ignited another until a chain of detonations rolled across the valley. Flames consumed buildings, vehicles, and men alike. Toxic smoke spread through the air, thick enough to choke anyone who tried to run. The heat was unbearable. Molten metal rained down. The smell of burning chemicals and flesh filled the air. Cartel guards screamed into their radios. Some shouted orders. Others begged for help. "They found us!" one voice cried before the signal cut off. Men tried to flee into the trees. Some made it a few steps before they were thrown to the ground by the shockwaves. Others disappeared in the fire. Trucks exploded one after another, sending fuel across the dirt roads like rivers of flame. The entire compound turned into a pit of fire and falling steel. Inside one of the Strike Eagles, a young weapons officer stared at the screen as the target vanished in the glare. His hand shook even as he followed procedure. The pilot beside him said nothing. The cockpit was silent except for the radio chatter of other crews confirming hits. The officer forced himself to breathe. He had trained for years to execute such missions, yet the reality hit harder than the noise. Every flash on his screen meant lives erased in seconds. He whispered, "It's done," but the words felt hollow. Mexican radar stations finally picked up faint returns moving north. Technicians shouted into phones, but there was no one to answer. By the time the reports reached command, the F-15s were already climbing out of range. They left behind only sonic echoes that rolled through the clouds. The F-15E had wiped an empire off the map in less time than it took to read a page. When morning came, satellites captured what was left. The jungle canopy had been stripped away. The ground was black and scarred. Craters gaped like open wounds. Smoke curled for miles. A few survivors stumbled through the ash. blind, burned, and coughing. They carried what little they could salvage. There were no orders left to follow, and no leaders left to obey. The U.S. had chosen to end the game in one decisive blow.
Cartels are now officially in the Pentagon's crosshairs. And it's not just the wall anymore. Trump ordered the kill shot.
Mexican officials have not said anything yet. The government remains silent as the world waits to see what will happen next. Fear has begun to spread through border towns and cities. People wonder if more strikes will follow, or if this was only the beginning. No one knows how Mexico will respond, or what kind of chaos might come after such destruction. But one thing is certain: the United States achieved its goal. The cartel that once ruled the jungle is gone. Its leaders are dead or in hiding. The message has been sent to every other cartel that profits from human suffering. They now know they can be found and attacked at any time. Their reign of terror might be coming to an end, and in that ending, countless lives will be spared. What do you think about this attack? Comment down below.